أهلا بكم مشاهدينا الكرام إلى حلقة جديدة من مستقبل الطاقة. هذه ملفاتنا. وزير البترول الهندي يقول لمستقبل الطاقة إن طفرة مشاريع الهيدروجين الأخضر ستحدث قبل عام 2030. وتكلفة الطاقة الشمسية في منطقتنا تعادل خمس المعدل العالمي. تخطط الهند لزيادة قدراتها التكريرية في ضوء تنامي الاستهلاك النفطي المحلي على خلفية نمو اقتصادي قوي يشمل معظم القطاعات الرئيسية لا سيما الصناعية والإنشائية. إلا أن الحرب الروسية في أوكرانيا لعبت دورا مهما في جعل الهند مركزا تكريريا عالميا هذا العام، حيث يشير خبراء التكرير إلى أن استمرار نمو عمليات التكرير الهندية في الفترة الأخيرة يعود بشكل رئيسي إلى الطلب المحلي المتنامي إضافة إلى الطلب لأغراض التصدير. ففي ضوء العقوبات الغربية على النفط الروسي أصبح من الصعب على روسيا تصدير مشتقاتها، وشكل هذا فرصة سانحة للمصافي الهندية التي استطاعت الاستمرار في استيراد الخام الروسي بخصومات سعرية مغرية وتصدير ما تنتجه من مشتقات نفطية لسد العجز في السوق الدولية. وفي ظل تنامي الطلب العالمي على المشتقات النفطية بعيد الجائحة، استطاعت مصافي التكرير الهندية تحقيق إجمالي هوامش ربح يفوق المعدلات العالمية، لا سيما وأن قطاع التكرير عالميا كان قد شهد في السنوات الأخيرة إضافات محدودة في قدراته التكريرية. فالهند تملك رابع أكبر قدرة تكريرية في العالم، حيث تبلغ قدرتها الحالية 254 مليون طن سنويا، أي ما يعادل أكثر من 5.1 مليون برميل يوميا. وتخطط الهند وهي ثالث أكبر مستهلك للنفط في العالم لزيادة قدرتها التكريرية بنحو 56.6 مليون طن قبل عام 2030. 84% من تلك الزيادة ستأتي عبر مشاريع توسعة لمصافي تكرير قائمة تعرف باسم براونفيلد، أما الباقي سيأتي من مشاريع تكرير جديدة تعرف باسم جرينفيلد. تجدر الإشارة إلى أن الهند قامت بين عامي 2014 وحتى 2023 بإضافة نحو 39 مليون طن سنويا من قدرات التكرير الجديدة، 61% منها كانت عبر توسعة مصافي تكرير قائمة، و39% منها عبر مشاريع تكرير جديدة. في السنة المالية المنتهية في آخر مارس 2023 قامت مصافي التكرير الهندية بمعالجة 5,130,000 برميل يوميا من النفط الخام، بنمو عما تم تكريره في العام الأسبق، والبالغ حجمه 4,850,000 برميل يوميا، أي بنمو في التكرير قاربت نسبته 6%. وتشير آخر البيانات الرسمية الصادرة عن وزارة البترول الهندية أن ما تم تكريره في المصافي الهندية في الفترة ما بين إبريل وحتى أغسطس من هذا العام واصل نموه ليبلغ معدله 5,400,000 مليون برميل يومياً، وهو ما يؤكد على أن مصافي التكرير الهندية نتيجة للعقوبات الغربية على الصادرات النفطية الروسية استطاعت اغتنام هذه الفرصة التي سنحت لها بشكل شبه كامل، ما جعل قطاع التكرير الهندي أحد أكبر الرابحين من الحرب في أوكرانيا. في الهند قصص مثيرة تتعلق بتحول الطاقة، من أبرزها مشاريع طموحة لتطوير إنتاج الهيدروجين الأخضر وصولاً إلى إنتاج 5 ملايين طن سنوياً. طموح يراه كثيرون بعيداً، لكن المفاجأة التي يكشف عنها وزير البترول الهندي هارديب سينغ بوري في مقابلة خاصة لمستقبل الطاقة أن هدف 5 ملايين طن بحلول عام 2030 متحفظ جدا بحسب تعبيره، وأن الإنتاج على نطاق واسع قد يبدأ قبل عام 2030. في هذه المقابلة تحدثت مع ضيفي أيضا عن الشق المتعلق بالطاقة في مشروع الممر الاقتصادي من الهند إلى أوروبا عبر الشرق الأوسط، وعن المشاريع العملاقة لتوسيع طاقات التكرير والبتروكيماويات في الهند. لنتابع.
Thank you very much for having me on your show. The Global Biofuels Alliance, you're absolutely right, under India's G20 presidency, it was launched by the Honorable Prime Minister. It was not a G20 event per se, but it is a G20 related. It was done like the economic corridor, which will run from India through the Middle East onto Europe and supported by the United States. Biofuels, as you know, have a very important role to play in energy transition, in getting to clean energy, etc. India has been a relatively late entrant into that field. Up until the time when the Prime Minister assumed responsibility, was elected in May 2014, we had attempted 5% of biofuel blending in some of our states and union territories. We did not succeed. We only reached about 1.4% overall biofuel blending. Then we set ourselves a target of 10% by November 2022. We were successful, we were able to do it 5 months in advance. Then we set ourselves a target of 20% blending by 2030. I'm very happy to inform you that with our experience on 10% blending being done 5 months in advance, we have brought the 20% blending target 5 years in advance to 2025. In India, we are using diverse fields for making biofuels. Sugar, maize, broken food grain. From agricultural waste, we have a second generation, 5 plants. One in Panipat is producing it from agricultural waste. We're going to make it from bamboos. We're also going into third generation technology from gases. India, biofuels will go beyond 20%. Why? Because India has the land mass, the sunshine, you know, and biomass. So compressed biogas, biofuels, is all moving in direction. You know, Brazil, United States and India, 3 countries put together account for 85% of global biofuels production. India is still small in that. But I think in the time to come, more countries will join biofuels. 2 things will happen. You know, the transition from fossil fuels to biofuels, it will not be 100%. We'll still be using old fossil fuels for a long time to come. How much we'll be using, I don't know. If the price of oil goes very high, the motivation to transition and go to alternate sources also increases. But I think biofuels is a major component coming time. Green hydrogen will be a main component.
Mr. Minister, I want to ask you about green hydrogen in particular because India has set itself a target of 5 million tons per year by 2030. Now, this raises 2 challenges for India. The first challenge is increasing and scaling up renewable energy production, not only for power, but for producing hydrogen. The second challenge is scaling up the production capacity of electrolyzers. So how India is facing up to these 2 challenges?
I hope I don't surprise you, but my comment to all my operators, the oil companies, I only deal with that part. You know, green hydrogen in India is a very interesting story. There are different parts of the green hydrogen equation. I mean, one is those who are in the business of making steel, they will do it separately. The power people will do it separately. I think that 5 million metric tons figure that you give is too conservative. I'll tell you why. Green hydrogen lends itself to success where there is going to be a demand locally, where you can produce locally, and where you can consume locally. Because hydrogen gas or any gas, by its very nature, does not lend itself to transportation. So if somebody were to tell me that they could make green hydrogen in Western Australia and transport it into, yes, you can do it. Green ammonia you can export, but the gas by itself, no, it brings an additional cost. We in India, I think, are on the right path because we have demonstrated that we can bring down the cost of production per unit. We've already brought it down from 25 cents a unit to 3 cents a unit. We've shown that. On solar, we can bring it down. Then you need electrolyzers. Well, you know, electrolyzer also, if you look at it, just about any manufacturer anywhere in the world is now in India. Why? Because the manufacturers realize that you need that essential prerequisite for green hydrogen production. No, electrolyzer manufacturers will go elsewhere also. I have a feeling that we're already in contracts to export green ammonia. In the coming time, and this 2030 is the golden thing in everybody's mind, 2030 agenda, sustainable development goals, 2030 green hydrogen, etc. It will happen much faster. We're already rolling out buses run on green hydrogen fuel cells. I did one in Delhi, only 2 demonstration, but by December we'll have 15. And we have both the indigenous R&D and we have the bus manufacturers, Tata Motors and IOCL combined on that one. And it's a very good combination.
But from what I understand, so green hydrogen, India is targeting to satisfy domestic demand first before heading to export. When do you think India could start exporting?
That's the fascinating story. Green hydrogen in India is also being driven by foreign capital. The company, I can give you the example of one company, it has raised $30 billion, but it's raised it from outside. They are committed to manufacturing green hydrogen, but they don't have a restriction that they'll do it in India. They've not said that they won't do it in India, but this is the company which is manufacturing green ammonia and exporting it to Unipar in Germany or to the Singapore where they're setting up a new GE electricity plant. It's both for both domestic and exports.
Let's turn to the oil market. Russia has been a major supplier of petroleum to India this year, given the price discounts that it was offering the market at the time. But Russia has engaged in reduction of its exports in the last couple of months within the OPEC Plus agreements. How has that affected India's imports of Russian export? What are the latest figures on that?
Well, I wouldn't have the latest figures, but I can tell you, before February 2022, the total amounts of imports from Russia was 0.2%. India, governments don't buy oil. It's the companies which buy oil. And the companies are at an arm's length. Some of them are pure private sector. Some of them are public sector companies. They float tenders for buying oil. And they float them for delivery at the point of importation. If they float a tender and somebody is selling the oil cheaper, they will buy. So its price sensitivity is built into that discussion. In between, I found that the supplies from that particular country dropped suddenly. Then I think they realized it, they've raised it. But you know, we traditionally bought 5 million barrels of oil in a day for use in our refineries. We had a rough division of 800,000 barrels between Saudi, UAE, Kuwait, Iraq, etc. Within that, that keeps going up and down. If somebody's charging an extra price, it will fall. It's very price sensitive.
Russian imports were 2 million barrels back in May. Is it below that now?
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. In fact, it's not only below that. I think it had come down by 500,000 barrels, if not more. I don't remember the figures.
You've mentioned some of the Gulf producers, and I want to move now to your refining sector. We know that Aramco and ADNOC are very interested in investing in the Ratnagiri refinery petrochemical complex, which, when it's built, it could be one of the biggest in the world. But this project has stalled in the last few years. Is there any movement lately on this project, specifically within the G20 summit or after?
I'll tell you, Ratnagiri project, I think it's important for your viewers to know what it is. If I remember correctly, the Ratnagiri project was designed for something like 60 million metric tons per annum. A normal refinery in India is about 10-11 million metric tons per annum. Now, there is not much experience in 60 million metric tons per annum, not even outside India. The first point is that that project ran into some initial difficulties. I have always maintained, and this was much before my time, I've always maintained it may be simpler to look at 3 separate projects of 20 million metric tons per annum located there or in other places rather than 60 million metric tons per annum in one place.
So you support breaking up this project?
It lends itself to easier because there are issues of land acquisition, there is a question of hinterland, there is a question of access to the sea for transportation. I think the current thinking is along those lines. That is all that I can shed, because there are too many players in this involved.
Keeping on the theme of refining, India's refining capacity currently stands at around 5 million barrels per day. Correct me if I'm wrong. This is, by some sources, they believe it could go up to 6.2 million barrels by 2028. But this capacity is much lower than what your ministry a few years ago has announced as a target for 2030. Are you worried that the build out in refining capacity in India might fall short of the growth in demand for fuel in the next few years?
No, I am not worried about that at all. I'm often asked this question. Our current refining capacity is 252 million metric tons per annum, but it's going up to 300, 320, 330, may go up even. No, if there is less oil, there's less crude oil that needs to be refined, there's petrochemicals. So we are not worried about that. We are going to raise our refining capacity. In fact, I use a standard figure of 400 million metric tons per annum as our target. We are going to be at 320, 330 shortly. But my Prime Minister used the figure of 450 one place. So I was a little, impressed, but saying, so India is going to be one of the major refining centers in the world. There's no doubt. But it's a growing economy. Today we're the 5th largest economy in the world. In another year and a half, we'll be among the top 3 economies in the world. Ernst & Young says that by 2040, we are the most populous country. But wait a minute, 50% of our population is 25 years or below. 60% of our population is 35 or below. This is a young population, it's growing. Our current rate of growth of energy consumption and demand is 3 times the global average. So all the figures that we are looking at, if India continues to grow aspirationally like this, and is, according to Ernst & Young, a $24 trillion economy by 2040, we'll need more energy. We'll need more refining capacity. And therefore, we work on all these fronts together. The green sustainability transition front and supplying domestic. Plus, India is a major exporting country now. It's always been.
One of the important fuels in the future is gas. India's gas production has been stagnant in the last few years. According to the figures that I've checked out,
it goes up 18% every year.
Let me present to you what I found, the numbers. It grew by 1% in the last fiscal year, whereas gas expected in terms of demand is to grow by 7% in the next few years. This might increase India's reliance on LNG and the volatility that LNG might have in terms of supplies and prices. How can India manage this risk of more exposure to the LNG market?
First of all, I think our production of gas has gone up by 18% in the last 2 years, okay? And therefore, there are some misunderstanding on the figures. But even with gas domestic production going up, we still import 50%. So your question will be relevant in either case. But listen, I'm an optimist. Domestic gas production will go up. We've had some very good recent finds also. But more than that, in the coming years, you'll find there's more than enough gas available in the world. That I'm not worried about. Because I think you have to cross the 2025, 26. There'll be enough gas. Gas is being found. Gas has to be utilized. Large pipelines are being laid. So I think that problem is, but India will always require the consumption, and because it has domestic demand.
نتوقف الآن مشاهدينا مع فاصل قصير نتابع بعده في مستقبل الطاقة. كيف تواجه منطقة الخليج تحدي التغير المناخي؟ أهلا بكم من جديد. ما نعرفه أن 20% من إنتاج النفط العالمي يتركز في منطقة الخليج العربي، لكن ماذا لو عرفت أن ربع الطاقة الشمسية التي يتلقاها الكوكب تتركز أيضا في منطقتنا، وأن تكلفة الطاقة الشمسية المتجددة في هذه المنطقة يعادل 5 المعدل العالمي. هذا ما يشير إليه ضيفي أكرم العلمي الشريك في بين كومباني الشرق الأوسط في هذه المقابلة التي أجريتها على هامش مبادرة مستقبل الاستثمار في الرياض.
The MENA region is suffering from climate change at double, in some instances, the rates that are being suffered globally. So it's critical that the region moves at a faster pace, especially in the Middle East and especially in this part. But in terms of the climate change that's happening, in terms of the degrees that are going up, but also in terms of the emissions that's going up. However, we are in a region that is going through an industrial growth as well, which does have its emission profile with it. So what's important here is that the balance of how we attack this challenge and the balance of how the corporate world plus the public world goes after this challenge becomes a very important question to be answered here.
ولكن يعني هل الشركات المحلية والإقليمية في منطقة الميناء هل وصلت باستراتيجيتها لنزع الكربون والاستدامة إلى المستويات المطلوبة لمواجهة هذا التحدي؟
It all starts with the government. So yes, 50% of the governments have been very clear about their net zero ambitions. When you take these numbers down and you trickle them down, and actually you realize that only 12% of the corporate world have committed to the same numbers. But it's an important 12% because it's the biggest 12% players in the region. However, when we take that even down further, only 6% of them are publicly disclosing what their numbers are. And that is a 50% funnel down that happens from the government ambition to the corporate world. What we have been seeing recently is that there's a lot of more momentum towards this, and the smaller players across all the sectors are looking towards the bigger players, and they're looking towards the bigger players to get direction, and the bigger players are moving. So it's actually a more positive note given the region and the transition that we are in right now.
بالحديث عن المنطقة يعني هل هناك attributes أو مميزات محددة للمنطقة تجعل وضعها وتحديها للتغير المناخي مغايرا أو مخالفا لمناطق أخرى حول العالم؟
We actually see this as much more of an opportunity than it is a risk. Allow me to explain. In this region, the cost per solar power renewable is 1/5 the global average. There are plans at the moment on green hydrogen being at $1.5 per kilogram by 2030 in the region. This region sees 22 to 25% of the solar energy that we receive as the globe. Combine that with the nimble policy making that we have, the fast decision making and the access to capital, this is the region that is going to be at the fulcrum and potentially one of the most important fulcrums of the energy transition as a whole. We see this as a tremendous opportunity for the region.
طبعا أنت جئت على ذكر السياسات الحكومية على صعيد وضع الاستراتيجيات لمكافحة الانبعاثات والتغير المناخي وتحول الطاقة، ونعرف أنه صحيح أنه التكنولوجيا مهمة جدا لتطوير التقنيات لنزع الكربون، ولكن سياسات الحكومية هي أيضا مهمة جدا. هل المنظومة التشريعية للحكومات في المنطقة وصلت إلى مرحلة النضج والوضوح الكافي لقيادة التحول في قطاع البزنسز والشركات في المنطقة؟
طبعا. Yes, of course we do. We can see it here. You and I are on FII today. What we're talking about today is that the framework by which the government is putting in the policies and the regulations, and I have to say the speed that they're doing it in, is allowing the corporates to move much quicker than they would in other regions, absolutely. And I fast forward to COP28. This is going to be one of the few COPs, or one of the first COPs, where there's a lot more of the corporate participation in the COP. And if those are indications of anything, it is the fact that there's a very strong PPP type of relationship that's happening in order to achieve this. And as I mentioned earlier, the combination of capital, quick decision-making, regulatory framework deployment does allow this opportunity to see itself through at a much quicker pace, which, as we started talking about, is critical for this part of the world as well. I believe the seriousness is quite high, both on the government side of things and on the corporate side of things as well.
نهاية مستقبل الطاقة، إلى اللقاء.